Well, Kevin, thanks for joining us today.
A treat for me.
Tell us, when did you start with the company? And you were kind of a precursor to our IT department, I take it.
In fact, in June of 1980, I came to WRAL as the traffic manager. And in the 80s, the late 70s and the 80s, the first end of the broadcasting business to adopt computers was the business end. It had to do with sales, scheduling commercials, generating program logs, and taking care of the accounting at the end of every month. And the company that I worked for prior to coming to WRAL was Jefferson Data Systems, and we marketed a system specifically for television and radio stations. And in 1978, I came to WRAL and installed one of those computer systems and spent a couple of months here installing the system and teaching the traffic department how to use it. A few years after that, the station's traffic manager was going to leave, and WRAL was looking for a traffic manager, and at that point in time I'd been on the road for about 5 years, and this seemed like a good jumping off spot, I guess is what we called it. I came here in June of 1980 as the traffic manager.
And you grew up in the business, so to speak. Tell us a little bit about your dad, who I know was very famous in Richmond.
In Richmond, Virginia. He, in fact, was the first person on television south of the Mason-Dixon line when WTVR signed on in 1948. And in fact, he was the station's first newsman, first sports reporter, first weather man, and the first kids show TV clown there too. I mean, he did literally everything. And I essentially grew up in that environment.
What did you learn?
That first and foremost, back then and even today, broadcasting meant just that. You had to have something for everybody. And I can remember on Sunday mornings, my father calling the station in Richmond and making sure everything was ready to run on a Sunday morning, because they would have shows like Lamp Unto My Feet and Camera 3, which were artistic type programs, followed immediately thereafter by Worldwide Wrestling. So the key was make sure you have something for everybody, and that's why they called it broadcasting.
You made a transition from the traffic department into other parts of the station. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the general manager at the time, John Green, knew me from days in Richmond, because I myself actually worked at a station in Richmond for about 6 years. What back then was WXEX, Channel 8. John Green was at what back then was WWBT. In fact, I think still is WWBT, call it was. And he was, I think, at one point in time their news director, and might have even been general manager at one time. But he had seen my work as a director at his competition. And when I showed up here, after a while, he and Will Davis, and I believe Ron Price was involved in it, gave me the opportunity to produce what we call Live at Noon. And it was designed to be a departure from what was happening at noon on all of the stations in town, and that was the goal. We wanted to provide viewers with an alternative to what they could watch at that hour.
And it was quite a varied program, as I remember it. You had a couple of really good anchor people and could do most anything.
Yep. Denise Boyer and John Hudson at the time were the hosts of the program. Denise, of course, was a reporter in the news department, as was John. John anchored a number of programs during that era, including, I think he was among our first early morning news anchors, along with Fred Taylor. But the program, again, was to be an alternative, and there were not two better people to provide that than Denise and John. We insisted there be, at least for the most part, kind of an element of fun to the effort, because the theory is that there was, ample news on at the time. We did that. but we also tried to provide something a little more, with a little more texture to it, and with a little more of perhaps what you might call an entertainment characteristic to it.
Now, I think I remember maybe Greg Fishel was still making appearances on morning and noon weather at the time, and you had the one and only Ray Wilkinson joining you.
Yeah, it was, again, by virtue of the fact that we had this certain mix of people that when Greg first came to Raleigh, he kind of cut his teeth on the noon program. Because remember, in that era, Bob DeBartoleben gave weather forecasts on the 6 and the 11 o'clock news. And Ray Wilkinson was iconic, legendary, and a man of the people. And from the standpoint of statewide agriculture, was probably among the most trusted people in eastern North Carolina. And it was an element of the noon news that really gave us opportunities that it seems that other stations just wouldn't even want to tap into. For instance, the State Fair. One of the biggest events that the television station would get involved with, and Ray was the point man. He knew everybody. He was on a first-name basis with practically every animal at the fairgrounds when the State Fair started. He was, buddy with the Secretary of Agriculture. He knew every farmer, and he had, amassed amount of trust among that segment of the viewing audience that, he was the go-to guy. And what he would lend to the program went way beyond just letting people know what, what the commodities prices were. He was a genuine entertainer, and he knew how valuable that was. And how important it was to the viewer. He had two characters that he invented and parlayed into what essentially amounted to a cassette series. Their names were Leonard and Cecil, and there must be a million Leonard and Cecil stories that Ray shared with viewers and with anybody willing to listen. And they were funny stories. And a lot of them were stories that you may have heard at one time or another. He would just insert the names Leonard and Cecil in them.
Live television is a unique proposition, isn't it? I remember one noon newscast in particular, I believe from the State Fair, that was just an interesting time, and I think you were producing that. If you might,
well, there were a number of them.
Some of that.
There were a number of them, quite frankly, that and. In the 80s, live remote technology could be a 50-50 chance sometimes, because there were a lot of factors that could affect what you were doing between where you were doing live television from and the studio. Sometimes communications would break down, and folks out on the live shot didn't know, what they were supposed to do, so they would wing it. And if it was Ray, you could always count on him to wing it in the best way. But there were occasions when some of the livestock was uncooperative. Some of the farmers were uncooperative. But you could always count on the crowd to pull you out of a hole. I mean, there were folks that would show up at the fair and show up at our tent at the fair every year. And they were our customers. I mean, they counted on us, for what they saw on television, and the opportunity to, press the flesh with them at the fairgrounds was something we couldn't pass up. But as you know, live television is often the unknown, and despite how much planning you may or may not do, what happens live, and you accommodate it.
Do you think that kind of programming sets WRAL-TV apart, or has set it apart over the years?
In fact, I think we were probably the first to do a lot of things that other stations later, kind of mimicked. In fact, we were a member, when I was in the news department, we were a member of an organization called CONUS, which pioneered the use of KU band satellite around the country, and in fact were part of a consortium of stations that were in what was called the CONUS network. And we did things with satellite that were done for the very first time, because I can recall vividly we procured among the first drivable KU band satellite trucks, and in fact there is a legend about how we pulled out of someplace in Florida about 24 hours before another station did, just for the opportunity to be first. And that was kind of what we did. I mean, we were willing to experiment, willing, to make mistakes and learn from them. And other stations quite often would wait until they saw what we did before they tried stuff. But we were genuine pioneers in a lot of the applications of what you see day in, day out on TV.
You've produced a good bit of our children's programming, Brain Game, I know. Tell us about that.
It started in 1997, and WRAL and Capital Broadcasting has a long-standing commitment to providing programming for young people, from the age of toddlers, elementary school age, done in a number of ways. I mean, you can go all the way back to a program called Captain 5. Uncle Paul is a legend, and we've had some great producers who did great programs designed specifically for kids. Smart Start Kids was done in association with the state of North Carolina. There was another program, CXP Express, which was one of the early efforts at combining things that happened on what was the early internet and kids' exposure to it. Dan Oliver was a great producer of that program. David Creech produced great kids programming. But again, that all comes about as a commitment to children, and again, something that my father taught me back then is that those kids grow up to be your customers, your viewers, and they develop a loyalty to you at a very young age. And as long as you nurture and cultivate that, you've got a good chance of keeping them as viewers. And essentially, we have a duty as broadcasters to provide that kind of programming. In 1996, the FCC rewrote what they called the Television Act, requiring stations to provide programming for children, and we were already way ahead of that curve, because it's something we've always done. Because again, we think they're an important customer, and from a business standpoint, you want to cultivate them to be viewers as they age.
You've seen a lot of technological changes over your career at WRAL TV. What stands out?
The digital age, quite frankly. I think that the conversion of this industry to digital broadcasting expanded, our abilities in such a way that we could be more places and impact more people in more and varied ways. WRAL TV gave birth to WRAL.com, which is among the most viewed websites practically in the country, particularly television station websites. The advent of high-definition television, we were the first. In 1996, we started broadcasting a high-definition signal. In fact, it was July 23rd, 1996, and I remember because that was my birthday. And there was a plaque. It may still be out in the lobby commemorating us being the first. HD broadcaster. But again, like with children's programming, we have always been on the leading edge of technology. And it always seemed to be to keep our competitive edge, that to not take advantage of and be aware of the technical advances that were occurring all around us was to be at a disadvantage, that somebody else getting there first was going to learn more quickly and be among those that set the standards. That was us, and we took advantage of the opportunities that that first of all were available to everyone, and then came about because you took the initiative to be first, and it has always been that way around here, even today, because if you take a look at some of the efforts of our sports department over the course of the last couple of years to simultaneously be live on the air, live on social media, and after the fact analyzing the effort, we've done things that television stations today are only beginning to see the advantage to. And again, that was because we were first, we were pioneers, and we learned from it.
Leadership, Capital Broadcasting, it boils down to Jim Goodman. I guess you started with the company a few years after Jim basically took over. And what have you seen from him? What kinds of inspiration does he bring to this company?
Well, first and foremost, he makes sure that the people that are on the payroll are the best that he can get. And it's interesting because I'm going to go back again to when I first got here, and maybe even a little before that, because I had the opportunity to see a lot of television stations when I worked for JDS. And you got a sense of their look, how they package themselves. And it was funny because when I got here, I came to the realization that, wow, this is the station that all of these other stations were copying. And it had to do, with the look, with the image that you project, and the integrity with which you did it. There was an art director here when I started working. His name was Art Anderson. And it was remarkable to see what he created and how just through, I guess what you might call osmosis, so many other stations adopted what he did. And we had, I think, a lot of stations in this country looked to see what WRAL was doing, and if it was working, they did it too. And that to me is kind of one of the leadership aspects of this station and this company, is that other people look to us to see how they can succeed. I think, and when you take a look at the company's stake in this community, and how the two are kind of joined at the hip. I mean, we know where we live, and we know that if we make a positive influence, so many people benefit from that. One of the projects that I have, among the projects that I've worked on down through the years, were the station's telethon efforts for the Duke Children's Hospital and for United Cerebral Palsy, which is now also part of Easter Seals. I'll bet we helped both of those organizations raise millions and millions of dollars, and helped an untold number of people simply by spreading the word. With the belief being that our audience is smart. They know that if we tell them they can make a positive influence on something, that they respond in a positive way. If kids can be helped at the Children's Hospital by donating $5 or $10, kids will be helped. They trusted us when we went on the air and said, this is a good cause, this is a worthwhile effort. You can make a positive impact and help people that are deserving of the help, and can, in so many ways, be a positive influence. And again, I think that comes about as part of the bond that the people they see on the air and the trust that they develop between people like Charlie Gaddy, David Crabtree, Deborah Morgan, and down through the years, the number of people that have gone on WRAL TV and asked our viewers, to help out. They trust us, so they help. And that to me is leadership.
What do you see in the future?
So much more, because this is one of those industries that's almost in constant transition, and we aggressively pursue the next horizon. And I think that again, the digital technology is going to increase our footprint. We are probably among the leaders of broadcasters that are using social media as a means to enhance broadcast, and vice versa. We're using broadcast to enhance our social media standing. Reporters here all have Twitter handles. I think they all have Facebook pages. We were probably among the first stations to see that as another way to spread the word, the WRAL Capital Broadcasting word.
Looking back 35 years at one company, that's quite a record.
But
not to put you in the grave yet, but what would you like your epitaph to be?
As that of a broadcaster, understanding viewers, wanting to be a part of their lives, and this being an ideal way to do it, and to be a part of an effort to make the quality of life in our community better. And I think that's one of the commitments that Capital Broadcasting has always had. And I think that viewers, and my father always called them customers, I think they buy into that. I think they can see that what this company has done and the people that work for it has been a positive influence on the community and has contributed to making this the great community that it is.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.